Welcome back to my channel. Today we will learn about the issue that has every General Hospital fan on the edge of their seats. The tranquil atmosphere that once defined the Boston Medical Facility has been completely shattered by an awakening that nobody saw coming. After months of uncertainty, prayers, and vigil keeping Maxie Jones has finally opened her eyes from her prolonged coma. And with that single moment of consciousness, she has triggered a chain reaction so massive that it threatens to reshape the entire landscape of Port Charles. This is not just a simple recovery story or a heartwarming tale of survival against the odds. This is the beginning of something far more complex, far more dangerous, and far more emotionally devastating than anyone could have anticipated. The awakening that started it all. When Maxie Jones first slipped into that coma, the entire community of Port Charles held its collective breath. Her vibrant spirit, her infectious energy, and her unwavering dedication to her loved ones made her absence feel like a void that could never be filled. The medical staff at the Boston facility worked tirelessly to monitor her condition, running countless tests and exploring every possible avenue for her recovery. Her friends and family maintained a constant vigil, refusing to give up hope even when the doctors began to prepare them for the worst possible outcome. But Maxie has always been a fighter, someone who refuses to let circumstances define her fate, and her awakening proves once again that she possesses a resilience that defies medical explanation. The moment her eyes opened, everything changed. The monitors that had been tracking her vital signs suddenly showed increased activity. The nurses rushed to her side, calling for the attending physicians who had been managing her case. Within minutes, the room was filled with medical professionals, all working to assess her condition and ensure that this awakening was not just a temporary flicker of consciousness, but a genuine return to the world of the living. Maxie's first words were barely whispered, her vocal cords weak from months of disuse, but her determination was clear from the very beginning. She wanted answers, she wanted to know what had happened during her absence, and most importantly, she wanted to go home. The legendary return of 5 powerhouses. The news of Maxie's awakening spread like wildfire through the intelligence networks that connect Port Charles to the wider world. Within hours, wheels were set in motion that would bring 5 legendary figures back to the town that had shaped so much of their lives. These were not ordinary residents returning for a casual visit. These were individuals who had faced down international threats, dismantled criminal organizations, and survived situations that would have broken lesser people. Their return was not motivated by nostalgia or sentimentality, but by the cold, hard reality that Port Charles was facing threats that required their specific skill sets and experience. Frisco Jones received the news about his daughter while he was deep in the field on a classified assignment that took him to the far corners of the globe. As a legendary agent with decades of experience in espionage and counterintelligence, Frisco had seen and survived situations that most people could not even imagine. He had sacrificed his relationship with his daughter for the greater good on multiple occasions, always believing that his work was keeping her safe, even if it meant being absent from her life. But hearing that Maxie had awakened from her coma triggered something primal in him, a paternal instinct that overrode every other consideration. He immediately extracted himself from his current mission, called in favors from contacts across multiple intelligence agencies, and began making arrangements to return to Port Charles with the kind of urgency that his professional handlers had rarely witnessed. But Frisco did not travel alone. He understood that the situation in Port Charles had evolved beyond a simple family reunion. The rising threat of Sidwell, a criminal mastermind whose operations had been expanding into territories that threatened both national security and the safety of innocent civilians, required a coordinated response from multiple experienced operatives. Frisco reached out to 3 individuals who had proven themselves time and again in situations that required both tactical brilliance and moral courage. Lucky Spencer, the son of legendary adventurers Luke and Laura Spencer, had carved out his own reputation as someone who could navigate the gray areas between law and justice with a moral compass that never wavered. Ethan Lovett, with his charming exterior, hiding a razor-sharp mind and combat skills honed through years of dangerous situations, brought a unique perspective to any operation. And Skye Quartermain, whose business acumen and family connections made her an invaluable asset in situations involving corporate espionage and financial manipulation, completed this formidable team. The four of them converged on Boston with a coordination that spoke to years of experience working in high-pressure situations. They arrived at the medical facility where Maxie was being treated, each bringing their own skills and resources to bear on the situation. Frisco immediately took charge of security arrangements, recognizing that his daughter's awakening might attract unwanted attention from parties who had interests in keeping certain secrets buried. Lucky began coordinating with local law enforcement contacts to ensure that their movements would not trigger unnecessary complications with territorial jurisdictions. Ethan established observation protocols to identify any surveillance that might be targeting the facility, and Skye, always thinking several moves ahead, began researching the financial connections between the Boston facility and various corporate entities that might have connections to the threats emerging in Port Charles. Maxie's determination, and the journey home. When Frisco finally entered his daughter's hospital room, the reunion was everything he had hoped for and feared in equal measure. Maxie's eyes lit up with recognition, but there was also a hardness there that had not existed before her coma. She had been through something traumatic, something that had forced her to confront her own mortality, and she had emerged from that experience with a clarity of purpose that surprised even her father. She did not waste time on emotional displays or lengthy explanations of what she had experienced while unconscious. Instead, she made her intentions crystal clear from the very first moment. She wanted to return to Port Charles immediately. She wanted to see her husband, Nathan West. She wanted to reclaim her life and move forward from this traumatic chapter. Frisco tried to counsel patients, explaining that she needed time to recover physically before undertaking the journey back to Port Charles. The doctors echoed his concerns, running through the litany of potential complications that could arise from discharging a patient so soon after emerging from an extended coma. But Maxie was adamant. She had spent months trapped in unconsciousness, unable to control her own fate or make her own decisions. Now that she was awake, she was not going to surrender her agency to medical protocols or paternal concerns. No matter how well-intentioned they might be, she demanded to be discharged, threatening to leave against medical advice if necessary. And her determination was so absolute that Frisco recognized the futility of arguing further. The medical staff reluctantly agreed to discharge her under the condition that she would be monitored continuously during the journey and that she would submit to a comprehensive medical evaluation once she arrived in Port Charles. Frisco coordinated the logistics of the transfer with military precision, arranging for a private medical transport that could accommodate both his daughter's needs and the security requirements that the situation demanded. Lucky, Ethan, and Skye prepared to travel separately but on parallel routes, maintaining communication protocols that would allow them to converge on Port Charles from different directions in order to avoid presenting a single target for anyone who might want to interfere with their return. The intercepted mission. As Frisco's convoy made its way toward Port Charles, maintaining careful security protocols and monitoring all communication channels for potential threats, they received intelligence that changed their route dramatically. Britt Westbourne and Jason Morgan, two individuals with their own complicated histories in Port Charles, were currently engaged in a dangerous confrontation with Ross Cullum, an operative whose connections to various criminal networks made him both a valuable target and a lethal adversary. The intelligence indicated that Britt and Jason were outnumbered and outgunned, facing a situation that could turn deadly within minutes if reinforcements did not arrive. Frisco made the tactical decision to divert their convoy to intercept the confrontation. It was a calculated risk that balanced his daughter's safety against the lives of two individuals who were fighting against the same networks that threatened Port Charles. Lucky immediately began coordinating with Ethan to establish perimeter security around the intercept point, using satellite imagery and real-time intelligence feeds to map out the tactical situation. Skye worked her contacts in the intelligence community to gather additional information about Ross Cullum's operations and identify any support networks that might complicate the intervention. The convoy arrived at the intercept point with perfect timing, their vehicles forming a tactical barrier that immediately changed the dynamic of the confrontation. Frisco and his team moved with the precision of seasoned operatives, their weapons drawn and their positioning calculated to provide maximum coverage while minimizing the risk of civilian casualties. Ross Cullum and his associates found themselves suddenly outflanked and outmaneuvered. facing a force that possessed both superior tactical positioning and the will to use deadly force if necessary. The confrontation that had been tilting toward disaster for Britt and Jason suddenly reversed, with Cullum recognizing that continued engagement would result in his capture or death. Jason Morgan, whose reputation for cold efficiency in combat situations was well earned, immediately recognized Frisco and his team as allies, rather than additional threats. Britt Westbourne, still processing the shock of the sudden intervention, quickly oriented herself to the new tactical situation and began coordinating with the newcomers. Within minutes, Ross Cullum had retreated with his remaining operatives, leaving behind evidence that would prove valuable in understanding the scope of the threats facing Port Charles. The intersection of these two operations, Maxie's return and the battle against Cullum, created an alliance that would prove crucial in the coming confrontations. Strategic deployment against rising threats. With the immediate tactical situation resolved, the expanded group began coordinating their approach to the multiple threats that were converging on Port Charles. Frisco, drawing on his decades of experience in counterintelligence operations, took command of the efforts to neutralize Sidwell's expanding operations. This criminal mastermind had been building a network that stretched across multiple continents, using legitimate business fronts to mask illegal activities that ranged from weapons trafficking to corporate espionage. Sidwell's recent moves indicated an interest in Port Charles that went beyond simple criminal opportunity, suggesting connections to deeper conspiracies that had been gestating for years. Frisco began assembling intelligence on Sidwell's known associates, financial networks, and operational patterns. He coordinated with Lucky and Ethan to establish surveillance on key locations in Port Charles that might serve as operational bases for Sidwell's network. They identified patterns in seemingly unrelated incidents over the previous months, recognizing how various criminal activities formed a coherent pattern when viewed through the lens of Sidwell's strategic objectives. The mysterious figure known only as C emerged as a particular concern, with intelligence suggesting that this individual operated as Sidwell's primary lieutenant, handling operations that required both strategic vision and tactical ruthlessness. Meanwhile, Skye Quartermain pursued a parallel investigation that focused on the Quartermain family's vanishing heirlooms. What had initially appeared to be simple theft or mismanagement had taken on more sinister dimensions as Skye dug deeper into the pattern of disappearances. Priceless artifacts that had been in the family's possession for generations were systematically vanishing, and the methods used to remove them from the Quartermain mansion suggested insider knowledge and sophisticated planning. Skye recognized that these thefts were not motivated by simple greed, but were part of a larger operation that used the stolen items to finance criminal enterprises or to leverage against the Quartermain family's considerable influence in both business and political circles. Skye's return to the Quartermain mansion was both triumphant and bittersweet. The family that had shaped so much of her identity welcomed her back, but the circumstances of her return highlighted how vulnerable they had become to external threats. She immediately began conducting a comprehensive inventory of the family's holdings, cross-referencing current locations against historical records to identify the full scope of the thefts. Her investigation uncovered disturbing evidence that some of the thefts had occurred with the assistance of household staff who had been compromised through blackmail or financial inducements. The trail of evidence began pointing toward connections between the heirloom thefts and Sidwell's operations, suggesting a coordinated campaign to weaken the Quartermain family's position while simultaneously funding criminal activities